Okay, let's get into this. We're diving deep into a name I think pretty much everyone recognizes, Jeffrey Epstein.
Absolutely. The headlines were everywhere, the accusations, truly shocking. The public attention was just immense.
Yeah, but we've got this stack of material today, articles, research, even transcripts that honestly goes way beyond those initial news stories.
That's the key point. This isn't just about Epstein the man. The sources we're looking at explore the networks, the systems he was tangled up in.
Right, using his story almost like a lens, to see how things like wealth, power, intelligence, even historical drug trades might connect.
Exactly. So our goal here in this deep dive is really to try and untangle some of that complexity.
And pull out the most important connections, the key insights from this, let's face it, very challenging information.
We want to help you see not just the events themselves, but maybe the underlying structures, the relationships that these sources are describing.
Yeah, hopefully you'll find some surprising details, maybe have a few of those aha moments about how these different worlds could potentially overlap.
So where do we start? Maybe with Epstein's background, as the sources lay it out. Because it wasn't exactly predictable.
No, definitely not the background you'd expect for someone who ended up, rubbing shoulders with the global elite. He was a college dropout, right?
Yeah, attended Cooper Union, NYU, but the sources say he never actually graduated from either one.
Which makes it even more surprising that he landed a teaching job. And not just anywhere, but at the Dalton School, a really prestigious place.
And there's this detail the sources point out the headmaster there at the time was a man named Donald Barr.
Whose son is William Barr, who much later became the U.S. Attorney General.
It's one of those connections that seems interesting in hindsight.
Yeah.
And it gets stranger. Donald Barr, the father, also wrote a science fiction novel.
Oh, yeah. What was it about?
Well, one source mentions it's called Space Relations, and it involves aliens forcing humans into sex slavery.
Wow.
And, later on, that detail fueled some conspiracy theories about whether the father might have had some inkling about Epstein's future behavior.
So from teaching math, he makes this huge leap into finance.
A really drastic pivot. And sources track this incredibly rapid ascent at Bear Stearns.
He had mentors there, big names.
Apparently so. Figures like Hank Greenberg, James Cain are mentioned. He started on the trading floor but quickly moved into serving very wealthy clients.
And dealing in those esoteric markets, as one source puts it.
Exactly. Really complex, kind of opaque financial stuff. His big value, reportedly, was this almost genius-level grasp of U.S. tax codes.
Figuring out how the super rich could, legally minimize what they owed.
Right. One source described him as someone who could just master anything if he studied it.
But then he leaves Bear Stearns pretty suddenly in '81. What was that about?
Well, the sources don't give a definitive answer, but there's speculation. Some material suggests it was tied to an insider trading scheme.
Maybe to shield higher-ups or even wider networks?
That's the theory floated in some sources, yeah. Protecting Greenberg or perhaps broader connections.
And despite leaving under, let's say, a cloud, his wealth apparently kept growing, though the picture seems a bit murky there, too.
It really does. One source claims he did something like $200 million in the 5 years after he registered as a sex offender.
Which is just staggering. But others suggest his fortune was maybe less solid.
Yeah, phrases like more illusion than fact appear in some endnotes. And then you have the Leslie Wexner situation.
Right, the billionaire. Wexner accused Epstein of stealing huge amounts of money from him.
Vast sums, according to one source. But the really notable part is that Wexner apparently never reported the theft to the police.
Which is odd. Okay, so that's the financial side, but the core of what these sources describe is obviously the abuse.
The truly horrific part, sex trafficking, abuse spanning, according to accusers, over 2 decades.
And consistently targeting young, vulnerable girls and women. Overpowered, controlled.
The sources are quite explicit in describing the abuse. Specific acts, the amounts paid $200 to $1,000 per encounter, sometimes 3 massages a day.
Staff reportedly had to keep thousands in cash ready.
Yeah, and detectives and victims describe this deliberate grooming process, starting slow, making victims feel, at first, like it was somehow consensual before escalating.
And he used his properties as the locations for this. New York, Florida.
New Mexico, the Virgin Islands, all visited by powerful people, according to the sources.
And that detail about the New Mexico ranch.
It's pretty grim. One source mentions an 8-person party shower, even an underground strip club.
And then there's the plane. the infamous Lolita Express.
Comes up repeatedly. Used for travel all over the world, carrying numerous powerful individuals.
There's that one account of a flight with scientists.
Right, describing these luxury touches like mink and sable throws, a fancy catered lunch from Le Cirque 2000, all at high altitude.
And sources specifically confirm Bill Clinton flew on that plane multiple times.
Yes, detailing destinations and noting his Secret Service detail was present on those trips.
There's also this really disturbing bit in one source about Epstein's own view of his operation.
Yeah, that's quite something. This source claims Epstein saw it as a way to collect dirt on powerful people.
Essentially blackmail, calling it the original cryptocurrency.
That's the quote attributed to him, yeah. And the same source paints this weird picture of him wanting to gather extraordinary people for, like, intellectual chats.
But also having this massive God complex.
Right, including these bizarre, repellent ideas about his own gene pool being so strong he needed to impregnate women, and his views on the less fortunate. It's just vile.
A really twisted mix of trying to seem like an intellectual visionary while engaging in utter depravity.
And central to enabling all of this, according to virtually all the sources, was Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yeah, you can't really understand Epstein's operation without understanding her role, can you?
It seems impossible. Their relationship is described in different ways, boyfriend-girlfriend, but sometimes privately as husband and wife.
Seen as this inseparable pair. And Epstein apparently treated her as an equal partner in it all.
Her background is key context, too. Daughter of Robert Maxwell.
The infamous media mogul in the UK.
Exactly. A very notorious reputation, according to the sources, linked to his own legacy. Convicted crook, major financial fraud, inflating profits, dodgy accounts, buying companies with loans.
And sources also link Robert Maxwell to intelligence agencies. British, Russian, Israeli.
Yeah, there's material mentioning an MI6 finding that called him Zionist loyal only to Israel, and alleged links to something called Nordex.
Which sources describe as a KGB front for Camel Flight, moving money out of Russia.
That's the description given, yes.
Yeah.
So that's the family background Ghislaine comes from.
And her specific role in Epstein's operation is laid out pretty clearly in the accounts.
Very clearly. Virginia Giuffre's testimony is powerful. She describes being recruited by Maxwell, drawn into their dysfunctional family.
Forced to service Epstein, his friends, taught how to act, dress, even hold cutlery to please him.
And how to please him sexually. It's incredibly detailed and disturbing.
Former staff members seem to back up her central role, too.
Yeah, a butler apparently called her the boss. A house manager said they were partners in business.
And sources quote Maxwell herself almost boasting about finding girls.
Right, saying things like, if I see somebody he likes, I go over and say, how would you like to meet a rich man? And indicating she'd leave the bedroom when Epstein was with others.
Described as very clever, knowing exactly what she was doing.
Though one source speculates maybe that phase really kicked in after she realized Epstein wasn't going to marry her.
One source says her job was basically to jazz up his social life by getting fashionable young women to show up.
But critically, the sources emphasize she wasn't just facilitating, she was deeply involved in the illegal sex acts, sometimes participating.
A powerful figure in her own right, using his money while he used her name and connections.
That's how it's framed, leveraging each other. Virginia Giuffre calls her the madam, someone who abused a position of trust.
And she developed systems for this, managing recruiters.
Apparently so, instructing them to target young women who were financially desperate, making false promises about education or careers.
There's that account from a recruiter named Haley.
Stark reading. Sources say Haley provided 6 girls, aged 14 to 16, accompanied them sometimes, and was apparently remarkably forthcoming with police about her role.
Maxwell herself is described almost like a chameleon.
Yeah, able to blend in anywhere, high society or otherwise. Seen as fun, funny, crass, smart, all at once.
And sources note she tried to hide when the FBI came for her.
Yes, and that her in-laws are apparently living through a nightmare because of the connection.
There's one more detail from Virginia Giuffre's account in the sources that's just chilling.
The baby proposal.
Yeah. Claiming Epstein and Maxwell suggested she carry his baby, offering money for life if she signed away all rights, saying the baby was theirs.
Giuffre reportedly said that was the final straw that made her determined to get away. Just horrifying.
Okay, so let's widen the lens now, because the sources detail this vast web of connections Epstein had.
Absolutely. Reaching into so many different powerful spheres.
Business and finance first.
Lots-
Leslie Wexner is the big one, obviously, that long, tangled relationship.
Right. The accusations of Epstein stealing from him, Wexner giving him power of attorney, and that alleged assault of Maria Farmer happening at Wexner's own property.
But beyond Wexner, sources mention others. Hank Greenberg and James Kane again from Bear Stearns.
Bruce Rappaport, the Bank in New York, even figures linked to more shadowy finance, like Semyon Mogilevich, the alleged Russian mobster.
And Sam Zell, Burton Cantor. That Castle Bank and Trust name comes up again.
Yeah, linked to that CIA banker, Paul Helliwell, supposedly used for tax evasion. It's a real mix.
Then there's politics. Connections across the aisle, it seems. Donald Trump, Bill Clinton.
Sources mention Trump meeting Epstein back in, 1987, attending parties. There's that film footage from Mar-a-Lago in '92.
Showing Epstein partying with Trump, cheerleaders there, Trump whispering to Epstein, pointing at women.
Yes. And there's an account from someone named George Heery, who reportedly supplied women to Trump, claiming he warned Trump about Epstein's preference for younger women.
After Epstein died, sources note Trump shares some conspiracy theories involving Clinton and Epstein.
Right. Well, Kellyanne Conway stated Trump wanted everything investigated thoroughly.
And on the Clinton side, sources mention White House visits, apparently arranged by Mark Middleton.
Epstein became a Clinton donor, too, contributing to White House renovations, attending a donor reception with Maxwell.
And those flights on the Lolita Express, including that trip to Africa with Kevin Spacey and Chris Tucker.
Which one source described less as a humanitarian mission and more like a boys' safari.
Clinton's lawyers apparently even claimed Epstein helped plan his post-presidency philanthropy.
Yeah, and the sources dig into Mark Middleton's background quite a bit.
Ties to Johnny Huang, who raised millions from allegedly illegal or questionable sources, some linked to the Chinese government.
That's what's reported. Middleton himself implicated in illegal fundraising, pleading the fifth dozens of times in Congress, including when asked if he was a foreign agent.
And the sources suggest his White House meetings with Epstein might have been about Epstein's business deals. Southern Air Transport, the Limited.
It's presented as a possible connection, yes.
There are other political links mentioned, too. Some pretty wild claims in some sources.
Like the one alleging George H.W. Bush financed the Contras with drug money.
Or another linking Vince Foster's death to counterintelligence, secrets going to China via Swiss banks. Again, these are claims within specific sources.
Absolutely crucial to remember that distinction. Then we circle back to Bill Barr, whose father hired Epstein at Dalton.
And Alex Acosta, the U.S. attorney who oversaw that Florida plea deal.
Sources are pretty blunt about him, described as inexperienced, not understanding legal basics, using his office as a stepping stone, maybe even targeted in a honeypot trap himself, according to one source.
Then there's royalty. Prince Andrew.
His friendship with Epstein caused a huge scandal for the royal family. Intense scrutiny, lawyers wanting him interviewed under oath.
The analysis of his infamous TV interview is fascinating, as described in the sources.
Yeah, psychologists looking at his body language, his phrasing, redefining party, trying to use authority, avoiding Epstein's last name to create distance.
The forced smile, signs of stress.
Pinpointed pupils, jaw movements. One analyst said he looked like a little boy caught out.
And that argument about memory remembering going to Pizza Express but not meeting or dancing with Virginia Giuffre.
The analysis suggested it implies either it didn't happen, which he didn't firmly state, or that doing those things was just normal for him, just a usual event.
There's a confusing bit in some sources about Maxwell recruiting Andrew.
Yeah, that seems to stem from a UK newspaper headline. The underlying source material, when you check the endnotes, clarifies it likely meant recruiting for Andrew, not recruiting Andrew himself. A subtle but important difference.
Okay, then academia, science, tech, Harvard comes up.
Relationship started in the late 90s, apparently. A $30 million donation for a program. Connections to specific professors like Martin Nowak, Stephen Kosslyn.
MIT, too. And Bill Gates' name appears, making donations through Epstein.
That's what sources state. Gates' connection to Epstein is highlighted, especially where their philanthropy overlapped, sometimes with Clinton's work, too.
Sources also mention Epstein investing in Ghislaine's sister Isabel Maxwell's company, ComTouch.
And that company apparently credited Gates for its success and credibility.
The sources list a lot of other names from these fields: Michael Milken, Nathan Myhrvold,
Linda Stone, Joy E.O., Esther Dyson, Steven Pinker, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett. Many connected through John Brockman's Edge.org community. Epstein clearly cultivated those relationships.
And finally, just quickly, Jean-Luc Brunel is mentioned. Epstein friend faced similar allegations, died in a Paris jail cell.
Another grim echo in this story.
So now let's go even deeper, because the sources try to connect these dots to older networks, organized crime, intelligence agencies, illicit trades.
Right, suggesting this kind of shadowy intersection existed long before Epstein, and maybe he tapped into it.
The sources give some historical context, starting with the drug trade. Opium in 7th century China.
But then focusing on the British Empire, making huge profits exporting it to China, calling Queen Victoria the biggest drug lord, the Opium Wars, addicts calling it Jesus Opium.
And then U.S. drug policy. FDR and the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 destroying the hemp industry.
With one source claiming FDR's family wealth originally came from his grandfather's opium trafficking. There are details about hemp harvesting, too.
And on cocaine, sources claim U.S. policy under Harry Anslinger actually created the black market.
By discouraging legal coca production in Peru through UN laws, it inadvertently boosted illegal production and trafficking.
Anslinger also reportedly protected Coca-Cola's access to coca leaves.
Yeah, sources allege he used loopholes, pressured Peru on prices, and targeted competitors, even after Coke removed the actual cocaine but kept the name.
And this history leads into a debate presented in the sources about drug policy itself.
Right. One perspective argues the issue isn't the drugs, it's the crime and violence fueled by prohibition.
Contrasting law enforcement's role protecting people from others with drug laws trying to protect people from themselves.
Which, this view suggests, should be the role of family, education, healthcare. Citing the massive failures of the drug war, drugs are everywhere, purer, cheaper.
The huge death toll in places like Mexico lives ruined by jail time.
Legalization is discussed as an alternative. Sequestering from kids, adult choice, health support instead of black markets, though acknowledging the complexities with heroin, fentanyl.
And then there's that striking moment in one source, an interview clip.
Montel Williams asking if the CIA knew about drugs coming in and helped. And the guest answers, absolutely, saying the CIA does it regularly.
Which directly leads into claims in the sources about intelligence agency involvement, CIA-linked banks and firms.
Castle Bank and Trust again, set up by CIA banker Paul Helliwell, linked to Burton Cantor, allegedly for tax evasion. WFC Corporation, described as a CIA drug smuggling and money laundering. Panamanian Unibank, supposedly the banker for a network called the Supermarket.
And airlines. Aero Air, Southern Air Transport.
Both with alleged histories of arms or drug smuggling. And sources claim Epstein and the Limited tried to get these airlines to relocate to Ohio to service the Limited.
Polar Air Cargo mentioned too, involving Southern Air employees from Flying Tiger Line.
Which itself was tied to figures like Anna Chanel. It's a tangled history.
Direct claims about CIA involvement in drug trade also appear in sources.
Promoting a partnership that allegedly grew the Southeast Asia narcotics trade. Backing a Bolivian government that exported coca to the Medellin cartel.
With the CIA allegedly protecting it, obstructing investigations, using drug money for the Contras, potentially linking back to Bush Sr. in one source.
And alleged blackmail hubs, like the Georgetown Club in D.C.
Sources claim it was bugged, used to collect dirt on the powerful by arranging trysts, linking to names like Frank Turple, Edwin Wilson. Claims about October Surprise, Iran-Contra also surface, connecting figures like William Casey, meetings linked to intelligence groups like Le Circle.
It's incredibly complex, involving multiple alleged networks. And Robert Maxwell's intelligence links are detailed again here.
Plus that source linking Vince Foster's death to surveillance and secrets allegedly going to China.
Then there's the organized crime layer described in the sources, the Bronfman family history.
Seagram, MCA Universal. Built on alcohol during Prohibition, working with bootleggers despite the drug company name.
Sources mention a Miami group of organized crime-linked businessmen with holdings in Florida and Israel tied to mafia figures like Santos Sorge.
Roy Cohn is presented as a central connector.
A major political fixer, liaison between the underworld, the elite, the media. His partner quoted saying Roy could fix anyone, power peaking during Reagan's 80 campaign.
That testimonial dinner for him at the Grand Hyatt.
A hotel described as a Trump-Pritzker project, with the Pritzkers linked in sources to organized crime. Cohn honored by Jewish groups, some connected later to Wexner.
MCA, the entertainment giant, also linked via Lou Wasserman to organized crime figures like Mo Delitz.
Sources credit Wasserman with helping Reagan's political career, claiming a DOJ probe was squashed by Reagan's AG. An MCA board member later reportedly advised Robert Maxwell.
And BCCI, the bank. described as achieving major penetration of the U.S. financial system.
Through figures like Burt Lance, Carter's associate who resigned under scandal. Kissinger associates reportedly consulted for BCCI.
And Danny King, described as a key pimp in a pedophile network.
Sources say he looted a credit union, made political donations. Other names like the Genovese family, Jimmy Freciano, also appear.
It's an incredibly dense web the sources try to map out. You really have to track the claims carefully.
Absolutely. Which brings us to Epstein's own legal troubles, starting with that first plea deal in Florida, the sweetheart deal.
Right. He hired Alan Dershowitz, described as flamboyant. Dershowitz met with the state attorney, Barry Krischer.
And then, according to sources, something disturbing happened. Prosecutors reportedly shifted focus from Epstein
to excoriating his underage victims. That's harsh language.
It is. Sources claim Epstein's lawyers essentially dictated the terms of the plea deal, drafts going back and forth.
His investigators even tried to dig up dirt on the prosecutors to get them disqualified.
That's alleged in one source, yes. The federal side was overseen by Alex Acosta, that rising Republican star we mentioned.
And the result was the non-prosecution agreement, the NPA.
Which, sources argue, allowed Epstein's team to spin this narrative of him being a naive philanthropist taken advantage of by so-called prostitutes.
Completely flipping the script. And that weird provision the government added.
About victims needing lawyers to settle civil suits for a set minimum. Sources call that highly unusual, not a typical government role.
Acosta later said they wanted to guarantee jail time, but sources suggest the deal was much more favorable to Epstein than that implies.
Right. Fast forward to 2019, he's arrested again. Federal charges, sex trafficking of minors.
And this time, sources say, things would be different. He wouldn't get out alive.
Even in jail, he apparently had a busy schedule, lots of appointments. Deputies struggled to keep up.
And work release had previously been arranged by his lawyer, Darren Indyke.
Yes, Indyke was also VP of a charity Epstein set up before going to jail the first time. The work permit was called very unique, job descriptions tweaked for Epstein.
But in 2019, in federal lockup, the circumstances around his death become the focus. He was supposedly on suicide watch.
247 suicide watch, according to one source note. There had been that earlier incident weeks before.
The first apparent suicide attempt, though he denied it, found injured in his cell.
And the video from that incident was reportedly lost due to technical errors. Convenient.
He also changed his will just days before he died.
Sources also mention his extreme wealth, his disgust with prison. One source suggests the mental abuse would have crushed him. He didn't have the inner strength.
Officially, the FBI says the jail video shows he died by suicide.
That's the official line. But, as the sources detail, there's immense public skepticism. Many reasons not to believe it.
While acknowledging things pointing towards suicide, the will, the prior attempt, hating prison, the sources list a lot of contradictions.
They do. Contradictory reports about surveillance footage outside his cell. First it showed nothing, then it didn't exist.
The death scene being touched quickly against protocol. No obvious means of death found on him or nearby in the coroner's report.
Guards somehow not doing their checks. Cameras malfunctioning. The coroner reportedly changing her findings later without new evidence. It's a lot of loose ends.
Conspiracy theories obviously exploded. Sources mentioned Trump tweeting one about Clinton and Epstein.
And ultimately, sources claim most who knew Epstein believe he was murdered.
Because he knew too much. Secrets someone would kill to keep hidden.
That's the underlying belief reported in the sources, yes.
And the sources contrast his fate with others involved. Many who allegedly helped him might never face charges, protected by that first deal.
While Ghislaine Maxwell is serving time, information about third parties, potential clients, people may be blackmailed, was redacted in her trial, suggesting the public might never know those names.
Speaking of Maxwell, sources confirm it's a 20-year sentence she's serving.
Right. And just before those damaging documents were unsealed, her appeal to block them was rejected.
And their release, sources say, showed the true carnage of Epstein and Maxwell's depravity. Naming powerful men, brutal details, confirming her deep involvement.
Virginia Giuffre's quoted saying Maxwell escaped responsibility for years until Giuffre herself spoke out.
Sources also mention Maxwell was denied bail before her trial in 2021.
So, yeah, we started this deep dive with Jeffrey Epstein, a name everyone knew from the headlines.
But digging into this material, the picture just kept expanding, didn't it?
Dramatically.
Yeah.
From his own disturbing operation and Ghislaine Maxwell's crucial part in it.
Outwards into these layers of connections, wealth, politics, science, tech.
And then even deeper into these alleged historical networks involving organized crime, intelligence agencies, illicit trades, as laid out in these sources.
What the material really suggests is how incredibly complex and potentially overlapping these different worlds can be.
Yeah, it paints this picture of a really tangled web where influence, money, and much darker activities might intersect in ways that are usually kept well hidden.
And understanding those potential links, but also how information itself is handled, what gets revealed, what stays hidden in redactions or conflicting stories, that seems crucial.
Especially today, with so much information flying around, knowing how to assess what you're seeing, or maybe what you're not seeing, is vital.
So thinking about all these layers, the questions around Epstein's death that the sources raise, the redacted names, here's a final thought to leave you with.
Given everything discussed in these sources, how much of this whole complex picture do you think the public ever truly gets to see?